That's so good. Okay, so much of your book deals with the fundamental question that we've just kind of been going around in this conversation, which you say in the introduction to your book is the question that leads a lot of folks to atheism, and for really good reason. This is the question of evil. If God is all powerful, then why is there so much evil in the world? And if God is good, then surely God would do something about that evil if God was all powerful. This is not the first time that anybody's ever asked this question. This is something that people have been debating for thousands of years. This, what theologians call the question of theodicy, right? So how do you help us navigate that question?
I don't hem and haw. I go straight to what I think the problem is. People have what I think is a false view of God's power. That is, the problem of evil, or theodicy, says if God is able to prevent suffering and God is loving, God would want to do that. Well, there is suffering, then either God isn't able or God doesn't exist. And I want to say, God's just not able to single-handedly prevent evil. This question is the number one question or number one issue for people who don't believe in God. When you take a poll and ask atheists, why don't you believe in God? It's not evolution that's number one. It's the problem of evil that's number one. And people who do believe in God, oftentimes this is their biggest issue too. And they usually sort of appeal to mystery or have some sort of thing. I've gotten to the place in my life where I think that we need to rethink God's power, God's omnipotence, as the previous person mentioned. Not again to have a weak God who's just on the sidelines eating popcorn and watching people kill each other or babies die. A God who's really involved, but God's involvement is never in a controlling kind of way.
Courtney says, Melissa says, on point about God's view of power, and Courtney says God is love and love does not control, which is your book in one sentence.
Yes, so, that's right.
Yeah, nicely done, Courtney. Nicely done. I'm interested in your statement that the number one reason for people to be atheists are this question. Because I kind of think maybe the number one reason for atheists to be atheists are Christians.
That may be true in some cases. Yeah, I think C.S. Lewis wrote something, long ago when he was alive that said something to the effect of the number one, the best evidence in the world for why there is a God is the life of Christians.
Yes.
And the worst evidence in the world that there's a God is the life of Christians.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Debbie says, God requires us to be God's hands, feet, mouth on this earth. When we answer God's call, we do this. Wasn't it Julian of Norwich who said that Christ has no hands?
Teresa of...
that's Avila.
Yeah, Teresa of Avila. Yeah, she's has a beautiful poem. Yeah.
So good. So good. Thank you for that, Debbie. So if you have questions, I'm running out of questions here for Tom. So if you have questions, keep this conversation going because it's so much fun. I'm going to skip. You've talked so much about the uncontrolling love of God, but how would you, in a nutshell, how would you explain or describe what uncontrolling love of God means?
Yeah. In a nutshell, that's a tough thing.
Expand the nutshell. It's all good.
If I was to sort of, everybody's got certain passages in the Bible that they kind of go to and say, oh, this really kind of sums things up for me. I've got several of them, but one of them is a translation of 1 Corinthians 13. I think it's either chapter or verse 7 or 5. It says, love does not force its own way. Yeah. And so if I were to sort of capture the uncontrolling idea, it's that love acts, but it doesn't force. It doesn't, to use philosophical language, it doesn't become a sufficient cause. Or the word I keep using in this conversation is single-handedly. Mm-hmm. God doesn't single-handedly fix things or do determine outcomes in the world. That's why this idea that we're God's hands and feet, or I'm willing to expand it to all creation, given its complexity, has the capacity to respond to God in some way and be God's hands and feet in the world.